Two of the worst bills that the California legislature has been considering this year for attacking pro-lifers have gone down in spectacular fashion this week, failing to meet a needed committee deadline. They have totally flamed out and are no longer going to be law. So we have a special new guest on the show. Jonathan Keller is yesterday's news. Joining us to talk about this is one of Jonathan's employees at California Family Council. She is the outreach coordinator at California Family Council, and she's up in Sacramento, where she's been sort of Johnny on the spot, or I guess Janie on the spot, attending committee hearings and following the progress of AB 315 and AB 710. These were the two worst bills attacking pro-lifers and pro-life pregnancy clinics specifically. And we're delighted to be joined today by the outreach coordinator for California Family Council, Sophia Lorey. Sophia, thank you so much for being on the show.
Yes. Hello, everyone. I'm so glad to be here. And I mean, Jonathan Keller, my boss, it's going to be hard to keep up with how great he probably does on this show, but I'll try my best.
No, it won't be that hard. You'll be fine. So let's talk about these two bills. The first that we'll focus on is AB 315, which I think was one of the more threatening pieces of legislation, directly going after pro-life clinics and pro-life pregnancy centers. Maybe, Sophia, you can just describe for the audience what AB 315 was going to do and how it came to be destroyed just earlier this week.
Yeah, so AB 315 is honestly probably the worst piece of legislation we've seen this year or within the past couple years attacking pregnancy centers. So there's been a couple, and we expect there to be more next year, but AB 315, the reason we were so concerned about it is its goal is ultimately to sue pregnancy centers into silence.
Right.
And it's not anyone could sue these pregnancy centers into silence. So it would be a private right of action lawsuit, and the fines are starting at $1,000. And these pregnancy centers, they're nonprofit organizations. They don't get all the funding that Planned Parenthoods do. So they don't have the finances to deal with these lawsuits.
Right. And the grounds on which these lawsuits would come would be basically it's the contention from the pro-choice side is that pregnancy centers are giving deceptive, false information to people, leading them away from, quote, necessary abortion services. And so any pregnancy center can be sued for, quote, deceptive advertising with regards to whether or not it provides abortion. But of course, no one wanted to clearly define what a deceptive advertisement with regards to that is. So tell us a little bit about what the committee hearings for AB 315 have been like, Sophia, because you've been really on the spot. You've been really on the spot. You've been going to these committee hearings. Tell us a little bit about what the environment has been like, because I think most of our supporters, have never been to a committee hearing in San Francisco, and it's kind of a real scene.
Yeah, so the committee hearing for AB 315, it was a rough hearing. There was actually a pregnancy center from Sacramento. The director, she came and testified and brought along a client that she helped. And it's always hard bringing in those people to come testify. You're bringing them into the lion's den. Yeah. Honestly. And so they have to sit there and listen to not just random people on the street spread misinformation and lies about them, but they have to sit there and listen to legislators spread lies about these centers. So that's been intense. There was a lot of back and forth in the AB 315 hearing, solely because we have an assembly member, Bill Lasaley, who actually spoke in defense of these pregnancy centers.
Yeah, he's been one of the real pleasant surprises over the course of this legislative session for how, enthusiastic he's been in defense of pregnancy centers. He's actually a Muslim personally from Southern California, from Corona, I think. But he's been one of the most surprising, fresh voices in the assembly this year. So tell us a little bit about watching today's hearing in the Appropriations Committee. Now, any piece of legislation that's going to have a fiscal impact in the state of California, it has to get passed through the appropriations committees, either the appropriations committee in the assembly or the appropriations committee, and eventually the appropriations committee in the Senate. And they have to get out of the appropriation committee by a certain deadline. So tell us about what happened earlier this week with AB 315 just sort of failing to meet this deadline.
Yeah, so in the Appropriations Committee, we've been actually working with a lot of pregnancy centers, and we kept telling them, make sure to keep calling your assembly members because most likely it's going to pass through the Appropriations Committee. It's not often we see bills that are targeting pregnancy centers or bills that are supporting abortion not pass through the Appropriations Committee. But I think being that we're in a large deficit here in California, there's a little bit tighter constraints on what they're letting through. And so AB 315, it was held in the Appropriations Committee, which essentially means the bill is dead for the year. And after contacting one of the legislators' offices, we were told that the bill can't be brought back next year with the exact same language. So it has to be very different to be brought back next year.
Wow. I mean, that's pretty impressive. So let's talk about AB 710 then, which suffered the same fate, again, kind of being held in the Appropriations Committee, not getting to a vote, and therefore the clock sort of ran out, and now it's dead for the year. AB 710 was also targeting pregnancy centers, but in a little bit of a different way. So maybe you could explain for our listeners what it was going to do.
Correct. AB 710, it was a bill that we honestly weren't watching as closely as AB 315 at first because 315 has the ability to sue pregnancy centers. AB 710 basically was they were just going to go through the state and expose fake crisis pregnancy centers is what the author, Assemblymember Schiavo stated. So we still wanted to fight against this bill because we wanted to defend pregnancy centers. And throughout the hearing, she continued to lie and spread misinformation about them. And it ended up turning into a bigger fight than we expected.
Yeah, well, and it seems like the idea would be it would be a state-funded kind of propaganda campaign or advertising campaign, if you want to get rid of the politically charged language, a state-funded advertising campaign to talk about how pregnancy centers are bad and here's where you can go to get abortion services. And it's funny sort of looking at it legally. When the state of California got smacked down because they had passed a law several years ago to force pregnancy centers to put on the walls of their waiting rooms where people could go to get abortions, the Supreme Court struck down that law, and Clarence Thomas said, "Look, if California wants to start an ad campaign on its own, letting people know where they can go to get an abortion, they can do that legally. They just can't force pro-life centers to advertise for abortion." And it seemed as though with AB 710, the state of California was going to take Clarence Thomas up on it. So, but again, though, basically AB 710 just suffered the same fate as 315, right? It just kind of didn't get a vote.
Correct, which again, that's something where we were expecting it to just go through the appropriations, and we assumed both these bills would pass the assembly floor and we'd have to fight them in Senate committees. So this is an answer to God's prayer, and God definitely has his hands over pregnancy centers by letting these bills die in the Appropriations Committee.
Yeah, well, and it's so funny seeing the Appropriations Committee and how it's such a rubber stamp process. Could you maybe explain that to some people? So, I mean, this is the Assembly Appropriations and Senate Appropriations Committees, the two most powerful committees maybe in the whole legislature. And just the way they do business is pretty hilarious. I don't know, maybe you can describe that for folks.
Yeah. So when you go to a normal hearing, whether it's in the health committee or all these different committees, the bills get read. The author normally has two people testifying in favor of the bill, and then people will go testify in opposition to the bill. So there's a lot of back and forth conversation. That's why these hearings get dragged along. But in the Appropriations Committee, like you said, it's one of the most important committees because it talks about the financial side of things. Yet there's not anyone really testifying. There's not much conversation. It's literally the bills are just being read out loud through a long list, and it's just AB 315 held, AB 710 held, and it's just
Yeah.
going through them super quickly.
And it's just, yeah, and it's just boom, 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 like
Yes.
approved, approved, held, approved, approved. You'd think that, the state of California, the biggest state in the union, deciding about, really expensive legislation sometimes. Like, that I remember last year, the legislature was going to pass CalCare, so a universal healthcare program. And obviously, whether you like it or not, it's an unbelievably expensive venture. And it just sailed through the Appropriations Committee with no one voting on it. Like with no one, excuse me, with no one debating it. And that's just the way the Appropriations Committee works. It's basically just whatever the Democrat leadership decides, we'd like this to advance, or this is a little too hot and we don't like it to advance. Do you think that it was maybe Sophia, and we're talking with Sophia Lorey from California Family Council, maybe you could pick a little column A, a little column B. Was it the fiscal stuff that you think was maybe causing the pressure on it? Or was it maybe legislators feeling heat for doing something that's kind of controversial and unpopular?
Truly, I think it's the fiscal side of things. I think it's the fact that we're in the deficit here. And I just think these legislators, they don't mind touching controversial issues when it's standing up for their quote unquote abortion rights. So when it comes to abortion, they're willing to pass nearly anything and keep it through committees. So other issues, it's maybe because they don't want to touch it. But this issue, I think it's the fiscal side.
Yeah. Well, and that has sometimes been over the last several years kind of our saving grace. It's, the only way usually we're able to defeat bad, pro-abortion legislation here in California is if you can find some kind of neutral argument for, like, this is too expensive, or we don't have funding for this, or, something like that. So, I mean, praise God that we were able to find, some reason for AB 315 and AB 710 to stop. So, well, Sophia, thank you so much. And where can people find out more about you and your organization and your work?
Yeah, California Family Council. We are on Instagram, we're on Twitter, on Facebook. You can find it all through californiafamily.org. It's linked there, as well as on Instagram. We're California Family Council, and same username on Facebook. And we're constantly posting updates about what's happening here in California, what's happening here at the Capitol. And we'd love for people to follow along with us and just keep updated with what's happening at the Capitol.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you so much, Sophia. It's been great to have you on Right to Life Radio for the first time. You were better than Jonathan Miles. So good job. We'll let Jonathan know. We'll rub
Yes, make sure to
right.
tell him that.
I will. All right. All right. We'll be back with more updates from the state legislature. This is Right to Life Radio. AB 710 and AB 315 both defeated in the California state legislature this past week. These were maybe the two pieces of abortion-related legislation that we were most worried about, most concerned about. And our thanks to Sophia Lorey for coming on and talking about it a little bit. And I wanted to just sort of expand on what she was saying and go a little bit more in depth at the threat that AB 315 posed. So again, just to break it down, like Sophia was saying, that the idea of AB 315, I think, was to sue pro-life pregnancy centers into submission, sue them out of business. And how are they going to do that? Well, basically, it was this anti-false advertising law. And basically, the law said any entity that's providing any kind of pregnancy-related services that is using deceptive advertising with regards to whether or not it is providing abortion is subject to a lawsuit, a civil lawsuit, with penalties up to $1,000. And it wasn't just that you could get sued by, like, the district attorney or the city attorney or some public entity. You were open up to what's called a private right of action. Just anybody suing you. That's what a private right of action means. It's like the right of, me to sue you or you to sue me. Private persons suing each other. Anybody who was harmed by your advertising. So you could have some joker call in to try to call your pro-life center or clinic and say, you guys offer abortion, right? And maybe get a confused receptionist or something, and then all of a sudden you're facing a lawsuit for inappropriately stating something. Your website wasn't clear enough. Maybe you had the word abortion alternatives or abortion information on your website, even though you clearly don't offer abortion, and then that could trigger someone trying to sue you. And basically, the idea would be, well, if enough people sue, it's going to rack up attorney's fees, and these clinics aren't going to be able to stand. And the definition of what is deceptive was not really defined very well in the legislation. Imagine the Leaning Tower of Pisa, and it's being held up by one stick, and that stick is the word deceptive. Like this whole enormous structure being held up by this very flimsy word. So what does it mean? How could you operate your clinic with confidence that you're doing the right thing and being safe if you're not saying, could you say that you offer comprehensive healthcare services if you offer the full range of OBGYN services other than abortion? Well, are you in trouble there? There's a lot that it was going to put pregnancy centers, pro-life clinics, in a really bad spot. That was the threat there. So by it dying, it gives some real security. It basically allows pro-life clinics to continue operating as they've been operating without this fear of individual activists filing a bunch of spurious lawsuits. And that's a huge relief, because the work of pro-life pregnancy centers, the left absolutely despises it. The narrative that is surrounding all this is so bizarre. It's this narrative that these clinics are actively lying about whether or not they provide abortion services. Like I read the legislative summary for AB 315. And this is a summary that's put together by the bill author and then input from different groups and staff who work for the state legislature put together this bill summary. And basically the authors of the bill just contend pro-life clinics lie. Pro-life clinics lie about whether they offer abortion, and they lure women in who think they're coming in to get an abortion, and instead their time is wasted, and then they spin their wheels and don't get an abortion soon enough. And that's just such a false narrative. The overwhelming number of pro-life clinics have on their website something saying we do not offer abortion. If you call them, they will tell you, no, we don't offer abortion. There's nobody there. The idea that there are all these pro-life clinics hiding the ball on whether or not they do abortions is just so silly. Now, it is sort of an issue that there's a wide range of these different kinds of, from non-medically licensed pro-life centers that just offer you, someone to talk to and maybe over-the-counter pregnancy test or something like that, to fully medically licensed clinics like, our Obria Medical Clinics of Central California in Fresno. That is a licensed medical clinic that comes from a pro-life perspective that's providing certain kinds of services, medical services. So there's a big range between these different clinics, and maybe on the lower end, maybe you have someone who's, not part of a larger network of such groups, who's sort of running it kind of like in a mom and pop show. I don't know. Maybe there have been people like that who have tried to lie to get women through the door to try to talk them out of having an abortion or something. But the idea that this is this massive problem, there are hundreds of pro-life clinics throughout California, and they're not all lying to women. They really aren't. There are dozens of these clinics, and they're not lying to women just to get them through the door. If you call them and ask them, they will, point blank, do you do abortions? They will say, no, we have abortion alternatives. Maybe we have someone you can talk with about the abortion decision and get information, but we don't do abortions. So that's all very clear. And AB 315 was basically, it's the pro-abortion movement that hates these clinics, hates what they represent, and has got this narrative in their heads that they lie to women, that they deceive women. And in our work with these clinics, nothing could be further from the truth. Nothing could be further from the truth. That's not what these clinics are. It's not what they're about. Now, when we return, we're going to talk a little bit about AB 710, which was also defeated earlier this week, and a little bit about what it's like to be in Sacramento for these legislative hearings. That's next on Right to Life Radio. shocking news this week as the California legislature did not, I repeat, did not advance two of the worst abortion-related bills that they've been considering this year, AB 315, which would have opened up pro-life clinics to all kinds of frivolous lawsuits, and AB 710, a massive statewide propaganda campaign in favor of abortion. So let's talk about AB 710 and dig into what this was going to do and why the Democrats, putting this bill forward, why they were so obsessed with it. Why are you so obsessed with me? The idea behind AB 710, it's a continuation of a years-long effort by the pro-abortion side to go after pro-life clinics. They don't like pro-life clinics. They have this idea in their head that they lie to women, that they deceive women, that they lead women along and delay women being able to get abortions. And this is deemed to be unacceptable. Now, the ways in which the pro-abortion side has wanted to go after pro-life clinics have been kind of characteristically cruel in various respects. You saw with AB 315, they were going to just open them up to lawsuits for being, quote, deceptive, whatever deceptive means. We're not really going to define deceptive. You're going to be, at a loss about, well, how am I supposed to describe our services? What can I say? What can't I say? Do I just figure it out after I get sued, what I'm allowed to say and not allowed to say? AB 710 is sort of a continuation of another cruel effort, which was a California law, AB 775. Now, what was AB 775? AB 775 was passed several years ago in the mid-2010s. And what this bill did was it required pro-life pregnancy centers, pro-life clinics, to provide their provide their patients affirmatively with information about where their patients can go to get abortions. And they could do this in a number of different ways. Either they had to post a notice on the wall of their waiting room, or they had to have it in their intake materials. You get your patient intake stuff, but name, social security number, your height, weight, etc. So either on your patient intake materials or on the wall of your clinic, even though you don't do abortions, you're forced to tell your patient where they can go to get a free or low-cost California-subsidized, California-funded abortion. Basically, they're forced to use the walls of their clinic as a billboard for abortion. The thing that most of these clinics were established precisely not to support, directly going against their conscientious beliefs as an organization. So this law, AB 775, got challenged, and it made it all the way to the United States Supreme Court and resulted in a decision issued in 2018. And this decision was written by the majority opinion was written by Clarence Thomas, and thankfully he was joined by he had Chief Justice Roberts, Anthony Kennedy. Anthony Kennedy rolled out of bed on his more conservative side of the bed. That's what he happened to do this time. Alito and the newly minted Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch. So Thomas, Roberts, Kennedy, Alito, and Gorsuch formed a bare 5-vote majority. And they said this law by California was unconstitutional. It violated the First Amendment by compelling speech. Okay, so the First Amendment says you have the right to freedom of speech, meaning that someone's not allowed, the government specifically, is not allowed to censor you for saying something that's unpopular. But also, as part of your First Amendment right to freedom of speech, the government's not allowed to compel you to say things that you don't agree with, to say things that you deeply disagree with, okay? The government can't come in here and dictate that the John Girardi show or the Right to Life Radio has to, you guys have to talk about how aliens are real. And I'll be like, well, I don't think aliens are real. Well, you have to say it. Okay. Compelled speech is also a violation of your First Amendment rights, in addition to censoring you for saying things that the government doesn't favor. So Justice Thomas held, no, you can't force these pregnancy centers to advertise for abortion on the walls of their clinic. And the left took this as a big blow. The pro-abortion side was really furious about this. There was a state legislator at the time who said, well, the Supreme Court fired one shot across our bow, and we're going to fire 3 more back, which was kind of funny because that's not really how it works. I mean, the Supreme Court, they kind of get the final say on most of these things, most of the time. But one of the things Justice Thomas said in his majority opinion was he was trying to draw the distinction between compelling other people to speak versus the government speaking. So the government, whoever's, controlling the government and the majority of the government has a certain ability, right, to speak, to advance ideas that the government favors. And if you've got, a Democrat-controlled assembly and a Democrat-controlled state senate and a Democrat in the governor's office in California, well, the state can promote a message that those kinds of people favor. And they do that all the time. States do this all the time. County health offices have billboards, advertisements saying, hey, you should do this. Environmental agencies for the state of California promote ads saying, hey, promote clean air, buy an electric car, don't burn, only burn on burn days, don't waste water. They promote all kinds of messages that the state favors that maybe individuals within the state might not agree with or disagree with, but the state has the right to say things. So what Clarence Thomas was saying is, look, you can't force a pro-life clinic to advertise for abortion like on the wall of the clinic. If you want to advertise for abortion yourself, you're more than welcome to do so, but you can't force pro-life clinics to do that. And that was actually part of his analysis for why it's wrong. Basically, if you're burdening someone's right to freedom of speech, the Supreme Court looks at it with what's called strict scrutiny. Basically, they say, well, did you have a compelling governmental interest to limit someone's free speech? Did you use the most narrowly tailored way possible to limit their freedom of speech? Was there no other way you could have achieved this compelling government interest? And as with most things analyzed by strict scrutiny, the answer was no. It wasn't the most narrowly tailored means they could have found. They could have, as Clarence Thomas was suggesting, if California was really concerned with pro-life clinics delaying people's access to healthcare, lying to people, not letting people know where they could get abortions, California could, if they wanted, just do a statewide advertising campaign to promote abortion. And that seemingly was what AB 710 was specifically going to do. AB 710 was going to be a statewide propaganda campaign, advertising campaign, whatever, to let people know where they could get abortions and to let people know, hey, these pro-life clinics, don't go to them because they just lie to you. That was going to be clearly from the nature, tenor, what the supporters of AB 710 were saying. That's what they wanted. Now, the problem that supporters of these two bills faced was that there was going to be some fiscal impact, especially, I think, from AB 710. There's going to be fiscal impact to this. Well, you can't have an advertising campaign without spending some money on it. Advertising is expensive. And the state is facing massive budget deficits. So this has been in the past, like kind of the one saving grace for pro-lifers. If there's a pro-abortion thing that spends a bunch of money and the state doesn't have the money to spend, that has often been the one thing that will result in even a pro-abortion governor vetoing it. Jerry Brown, of all people, Moonbeam, Jerry Brown, very left-wing, he vetoed like 2 or 3 really bad abortion bills in his last years in office for these kinds of reasons, because basically people were able to convince him, hey, this is bad governance. Like, we can't afford this, crazy pro-abortion thing or that crazy pro-abortion thing, or this doesn't work structurally or whatever. He was willing to listen to reason, whereas Gavin Newsom, up until this point, has largely not been willing to listen to reason. I mean, one good example of this is, the campus abortion pill law. Pro-abortion advocates had been trying to allow the abortion pill to be distributed at the student health centers of California universities for years. And the first year they tried it, kind of died on the vine. Second year they tried it, Jerry Brown vetoed it. Because he said, look, student health centers aren't designed for this kind of thing. This is kind of a drastic intervention. We need to have like ultrasound machines to make sure that, the person getting the abortion pill isn't having an ectopic pregnancy or something. Student health centers aren't supposed to have the capacity to have an ultrasound machine. Like, we don't have the money to spend on it. No, this is beyond their scope. But Gavin Newsom signed it into law his first year in office, because he's that much of an ideologue. But again, this is our saving grace here. The federal government can spend into the red. They can engage in deficit spending. They can pass a law to expand the debt ceiling. The Federal Reserve can keep printing money. People can keep buying U.S. bonds. Like, the federal government can keep spending into the red if it wants to. State governments can't do that. State and local governments can't really do that. Eventually, you got to pay the piper. You can't just keep spending indefinitely into the red when you're a state government or a local government. And as a result, this forces even insane abortion ideologues like Gavin Newsom, who is indeed an insane abortion ideologue, who I really, truly believe, this is my grander theory of Gavin Newsom, is that he's basically just cruising through his second term, not going to try to work very hard. He has nothing. The only thing he has to run for is running for president in 2028. And so he's just trying to appeal to maybe his top 30 ultra rich donors by doing like MSNBC style governance. So go to Florida to yell about Ron DeSantis, or go to Texas to yell about how terrible Greg Abbott is, or, talk about abortion rights, put up billboards in Oklahoma about how terrible Oklahoma's abortion laws are and how everyone should come to California. These are all things that are done to entertain about 30 ultra-rich, socially liberal donors that Newsom wants to placate so that they'll give him money when he runs for president. That's all he's doing. But nonetheless, like, these two bills clearly died because either Democrat leadership or Gavin Newsom just didn't want them to advance. We'll talk about how that works within assembly committees after the break. This is Right to Life Radio on Power Talk. Back with Right to Life Radio. AB 315 and AB 710 go down in flames this week. Maybe the two worst pro-abortion bills before the state legislature. AB 315, which was going to allow pro-life clinics and centers to be sued. AB 710, which was going to be a statewide propaganda campaign in favor of abortion and against pro-life pregnancy centers. Both go down in flames. Now, this gives me an opportunity to talk about committee hearings in the California legislature. You'd think this is a pretty boring topic, but it's actually pretty fascinating when you actually get to go to them and see up close and personal. You never want to see how the hot dogs are made, and you really don't want to see how legislation is made in the state of California. So this is how it works. Early in the legislative year, and the legislative year runs from December through September. Early in the legislative year, from about December to February, members of the Assembly and members of the State Senate introduce pieces of legislation that they have written. They have to get them all introduced by a certain date in February. After that, they get assigned by the Rules Committee to different policy committees. Okay, you have a bill that's about higher education, might have some legal impact, so we're going to assign it to the Higher Education Committee, the Judiciary Committee, and it's going to spend money, it's going to cost money. Okay, then it has to go to the Appropriations Committee. So the bill gets heard in its different committees, and if it fails to pass a committee, then it's kind of dead. Now, it has to pass all of its policy committees by a certain deadline, and then it has to pass its fiscal committee, its appropriations committee, by another deadline. After it does that, it goes to the floor of the House where it was introduced. So if an assembly member wrote the bill, it goes to the floor of the assembly for all 80 assembly members to vote on it. If they pass it, then the bill goes through the same process again in the other House, in the state Senate, let's say. So it gets assigned to different committees. The policy committees vote on it. It goes to the Senate Appropriations Committee. The Appropriations Committee either approves it, and then it might go to the floor of the Senate for a final vote on the floor of the Senate. If it passes the Assembly and passes the Senate, it goes to the governor's desk. That has to happen by in an election year that has to happen by August 31st. And then the governor has all of September to decide if he's going to sign or veto all of the gazillions of bills that were passed over the course of the year. So what you can see is that among these committees, the appropriations committees are the most important. Any bill that spends money has to get approved by the appropriations committee. And really, any bill that's important in any way, shape, or form goes through the appropriations committee. So it's kind of the bottleneck. It's the bottleneck where Democrat leadership can decide, do all of our members really want to vote on this? Maybe it's a bill some people do want to vote on, but other people don't want to vote on. Maybe it's a bill we're not 100% gung-ho about, or we don't totally support. So are we going to pass this or not? So rather than functioning as a deliberative body to seriously weigh the fiscal impact of a piece of legislation, what the Appropriations Committee really becomes is the winnowing ground in which Democrat leadership separates the wheat and the chaff. And they say, all right, we want to pass this, but we don't really want to pass that. We want to pass this, and we don't want to pass that. And so if it's something they want to pass, they have a very quick vote and say, all right, approved. AB 123, approved. AB 124, approved. But if it's something maybe they don't want to vote for it or vote against it, maybe it's too controversial or maybe not well thought out, or maybe it's something they're not sure about, they'll put it on ice. They'll put it in either the suspense file, which means just hang in there for another day, or they'll just not vote on it. And then it misses its deadline and the bill dies. And that's what happened with AB 315 and AB 710. They just didn't get a vote, and now they are dead. They are dead for the year. Can't reintroduce the bills. So why did that happen? The governor is not uninvolved with this process. If you've got a bill and you know it spends money and it might have a fiscal impact and people might be nervous about it, at some point the governor has to sign this thing. So maybe you give a call to the governor's office and you take the temperature. I'm wondering if the governor sort of killed these things. Obviously, there was some debate, some decision-making made among Democrat leadership. It sounds like Planned Parenthood was actually not as enthusiastic about these two bills as you would have expected. And there's also, as Sophia was saying, this fiscal crunch that California's in. We're facing large budget deficits. So all of a sudden, the Democrats sort of decided, well, we don't want to advance this. And they let these two bills, AB 315 to sue pro-life pregnancy centers for, quote, deceptive advertising, whatever deceptive means, and AB 710 to promote a statewide advertising campaign in favor of abortion. They let these two things die. So I wonder exactly what happened. I'm not suggesting that Gavin Newsom has had some grand, conversion experience or something. Now he's pro-life or something. Of course not. Not that would be impossible, but he certainly has not expressed such. I'm not saying there's some miracle that has happened, but I'm sort of glad that at least some kind of sane reasoning was able to be brought to bear. Look, we don't have a lot of money in California. We're really going to use taxpayer money to fund an advertising campaign for maybe literally the most controversial topic in all of American life, a topic that millions of Californians disagree about. Millions of Californians would feel like their taxpayer dollars were ripped away from them to use for a message they don't like. And that sucks. So I wonder if Democrat leadership sort of just took the posture of maybe we save this for, a less rainy day. Maybe that's what we do. So anyway, regardless of what the reasoning was, thank God for AB 315 and AB 710 being defeated this week in the California State Legislature. Thank you all so much for listening to Right to Life Radio. Thanks to our guest, Sophia Lorey, for being on the show. And we will see you next time. Go to rtlcc.org to learn more about us at Right to Life of Central California. Go to obria365.org to support our Obria medical clinics of Central California. Thank you so much, and God bless.